Hello, this is James from xrobots.co.uk. This is part 2 of the Bladez Toyz life-size Hot Wheels drone racer build, which is a giant RC version of the toy. So check out part 1 to find out what it's all about. Last time we got as far as making the chassis work and we took that for a spin out in the car park. This time we've got all the cosmetics to finish, and we've also got to get the quad mounted and get the rotors working. The drone part of the toy is mounted on a ramp which normally lifts up when you rev the drone, but mine is motorised, so we need to make a ramp, and I've done that with 2020 extrusion, which will have some plywood mounted to the top with bolts and T-nuts. I drilled all the holes, and I also drilled some bigger holes for hand wheel bolts which are about an M8 size. The piece of plywood was screwed down with the bolts. And I also made another piece of plywood which is actually going to be the bottom of the drone, and that's got 2 slots in to allow the actuators to fit. The handwheel bolts fit from the bottom, and those fit into captive nuts in pieces of 3D print. This means we can easily remove the drone. The blocks holding the captive nuts are screwed down to the piece of plywood, and that means they'll hold their position inside, so we can take the handwheel bolts in and out really easily without losing the nuts. This seems to be a pretty good fit, and that allows that piece of wood to be removed. I drilled some holes in some bits of steel that I got from a local DIY store, and these are going to make levers so that we can actually push that ramp up and down from the actuators. I made a pivot block out of some 3D prints, and measured the ramp for each side to make sure we put them in the same place. This gives me a couple of pullers which are hinged, and that means we can pull that ramp up on the actuators. So the bottom of the drone will fit over them through the slots, and then we can use those actuators to raise and lower the drone, just like in the toy. Next, I fitted that panel to the bottom of the drone, and I used 3D printed parts to make that nice chamfer there. So these are screwed in from the inside, and I have pilot holes already in the 3D prints that are again printed on the Lulzbot More extruder. I put quite a lot of screws in here and made sure it's nice and strong, because that's basically all that's going to hold the drone into the car. So now the drone will raise and lower, and that can be actuated with remote control or just with a switch. I think most of the time we're going to leave it in the up position though, because that's kind of how the toy looks when it drives along. I thought I should sort out the paint job, so I masked a nice straight line and used the same black exterior sealant that I used in part 1 to paint over it. I've gone over all the screw heads and all the chips of wood that have happened when I put those extra screws in, so we get a nice black uniform finish. Obviously peeling off the masking tape gives me a nice uniform straight edge. I'm using some 1kW outrunners to turn the 30-inch rotors. They're actually really undersized for something with rotors that size. However, this version isn't actually going to fly, so we just need something to turn those rotors and look pretty impressive. Yep, I think that's probably going to look pretty good with all 4 of them mounted. I'm using 90 amp quadcopter ESCs, which are just off the shelf, to turn those motors. That should be more than enough current. I think the motor actually peaks at 60 amps. We're also running it on much less cells than we would normally run. I put a collar on top of the motor shaft with a little grub screw to stop those nuts getting undone. Of course, 2 of the rotors run in the opposite direction, which would normally undo the nuts. So we gave this a pretty good test, and it's fairly terrifying. Of course, there is a blade guard, but we'll have to be quite careful. So it's time to make some more cosmetic panels, and we cut up the engine block, having scaled it up 25 times and printed it in about 8 pieces on the Lulzbot More extruder. This has a 1.2mm nozzle, so it makes the parts pretty quick, and the layer bonding's really good because the extrusions are so much fatter. I spent quite a long time with filler and sanding to try and get rid of all the build lines though, because we printed it in about a 0.8mm layer height. So we had to do this both with the engine block and with the nose cone. Next up, it was time to make the rotor guards, so we scaled up the CAD 25 times and printed out the sketch on some big sticky sheets on the office printer and stuck them on sheets of 5.5mm plywood. I spent a very long time cutting these out with a jigsaw. And next I cut some strips with a normal handsaw to get those cuts really straight. We don't really have a wood shop in the office, and that's why I'm not using a skill saw or a table saw. All of those edges were stuck on using super glue and a mitre pen, which is super glue activator, which helps that super glue go off super quick and stick really well. Obviously the wood is really absorbent, so they made really good bonds. Here they are assembled, and I must say it's getting quite weird to see all these toy parts scaled up 25 times. I stuck little tabs in the corners for extra strength, and again I used super glue and the mitre pen. These need to be mounted, so again I printed some more extruder parts to print the actual arms which mount the blade guards, and these need to divide in two for transport, so they're going to have bolt holes halfway up, and then they can be disassembled so we can take it all in a van when we take it up for the event. The blades seem to run pretty freely, there were some minor adjustments, but that seems to work pretty well. I'm a bit happier now we've got the blade guards on, and it's really starting to look like the toy. These of course wouldn't be complete without some red paint to match the toy, and that really sets it off. Next it's time to make the spoiler which fits on the tail, so we printed these again with the Moore extruder in about 6 parts and glued them all together. Most of the cosmetic parts have been painted with a brush because we don't have a spray booth or any facilities like that, so I've just used silver acrylic. Here's the main assembly, that seems to fit pretty neatly on my box at the back, and there's that spoiler. Even though the spoiler's already yellow, I just overpainted it in the same acrylic that we're going to use for the main body shell, so all the parts match. The nose cone was also painted silver, and that fits pretty well. Next up it was time to paint the body shell, and I masked and painted the black windscreen so it looks just like the toy. Again, the masking tape was removed to give a nice clean line. I added 2 tabs so we can mount the body shell, but that's going to be permanently fixed on because we don't want it getting thrown off by all the wind from the rotors. There's some roll cage detail on the side in the toy, so again we scaled that up 25 times and glued it on. We also added the clips which hold the body shell on, because in the toy those are interchangeable for different colours and different styles. I printed out some covers, and these for the actual drive belts that drive the wheels, because they look a bit messy, and I hacked a big hole in to let the motors out. You can't really see them here, but that's their entire purpose, which is to hide that belt and just blend in with the black bodywork. We got our graphic design team to print out all the decals, which are again scaled up 25 times, and we did this on the office printer on sticky vinyl. This is Chris, who's one of our concept designers, and he got the job of sticking all the decals down and trying to get them perfectly straight on all of the handmade parts and all of the 3D prints with their lumps and bumps. The toy is licensed by Mattel's Hotwheels brand, but of course it's actually made by Bladez Toyz, so we've got little Bladez logos as well. We've got to do something about those wheelbarrow wheels, and the toy has nice hubcaps, so we bought some actual hubcaps for cars off eBay and sprayed them yellow to match the toy. We 3D printed a surround, and that seems to make the wheel the right width. I glued in little tabs and screwed those straight onto the wheelbarrow wheels. I think I got them straight. It seems to roll pretty well anyway, so it'll be fine as long as we don't drive over any rocks. The tyres stick out slightly so they still grip the ground. This is most of the build done, so a final rotor test and we're nearly at the very end. Right, that's the end of the build, but now we need to show it to Ian Morgan, the MD from Bladez Toyz, who hasn't actually seen it since we drove the chassis around the car park in Par 1, because he's been at trade shows. So, Ian, you can come in. What do you think? It's all finished.
James, you've done it!
Alright, are you happy? What do you think?
It's a scaled model, 125 times the scale. Look at it!
It is pretty much, yeah.
It's got the lights, the rotors, the guard, the colour. Fantastic.
Alright, do you want to have a go?
I'd love to.
Right,
It works?
now be really careful. The left hand stick.
Okay, here we
Be
go.
cautious, be cautious.
Have you tested it yet?
I've sort of.
That's crazy.
Yeah, what do you think? Will this be a good presentation piece?
You accepted the challenge.
Alright. And if you want to see it in person, you can come to Hamley's Parade on
19th of November, Regent Street.
in
Be there.
central London.